You ever have one of those moments when the world just stops and you realize, right then, right there, someone's about to pull the rug out from under you? That's exactly how it started for us. On a Tuesday morning that should have been nothing but quiet. She's going to have to remove that bench. That voice, sharp and smug, cut across the rose garden like a hedge trimmer at dawn, just loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Cynthia Bellamy. Yeah, the one with the permanent frown lines, stood there with her arms folded, staring down at the wooden bench under our cherry blossom. She didn't care it was spring or that Lena, my wife, was kneeling in the dirt, pruning her sister's roses. To Cynthia, it was just another day to play queen of the block. That bench violates Article 9, non-conforming landscape elements, unapproved structure. It goes, she announced, waving some HOA notice like a victory flag. Lena didn't even look up, just paused mid-snip, hand gentle as always. You approved it 5 years ago, she said, voice steady. Cynthia sniffed. That was the old board. This is a current violation. The board has decided. She acted like she was talking trash bins, not a memorial. And you know, I'd had enough. I stepped onto the grass, crossing into what we call the military honor garden, a spot that meant something. Cynthia blinked, just a flicker, but I saw it. That pause when she realized maybe she'd picked the wrong fight. Let me back up a sec. My name's Jason Callan. I'm a retired Air Force logistics guy. These days, I do risk compliance, municipal surveillance, legal audits, the kind of work where you live in the details. I don't just read HOA covenants. I write policy for cities bigger than Willow Ridge. So, when Cynthia, who once fined a neighbor for the color of his mailbox flag, came after Lena's bench, I didn't see a rule violation. I saw someone taking aim at the woman I'd walked through fire for. That bench. Oak slats, steel frame, carved by hand. It was the last thing Lena and her sister built together before deployment. Her sister never made it home. Lena put that bench under the cherry tree so the petals would fall slow every April, so she could sit and remember, even when the world kept spinning. And when those memories came clawing back, that's where she'd go. The VA calls it PTSD. The Army called it an honorable discharge. Me? I call it survival. But Cynthia? She called it visual nonconformity. She wrinkled her nose, scribbled a violation, and slapped it on our mailbox like a sheriff serving justice. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for a crack in her armor. And you know what? I found it. Not in old boxes or secret files, right in the HOA code. Cynthia was leaning on Article 9.2, but the city could override that, and I drafted the language for the county myself, back in 2018. Cynthia didn't know that, so I watched. She wasn't just picking on Lena. She'd been targeting veterans in our neighborhood for months. Flagpoles were trip hazards. Memorial plaques disrupted aesthetics. She wasn't enforcing the rules. She was rewriting them for her own kingdom. Then the spring social came. I had no clue I'd be standing there, watching Cynthia grab Lena by the throat in front of a dozen neighbors. Yeah, that happened. But even before that, things got uglier. 2 days after the first violation, Lena's VA therapist called me. Cynthia had flagged Lena's address in a wellness survey, filed an informal report saying Lena's combat background and erratic gardening behavior were distressing the neighbors' kids. Erratic gardening behavior, imagine that. We were at the dog park when the call came. Lena was tossing a tennis ball for Brisket, our shepherd mix. I saw Cynthia across the field, talking to a group of mothers, waving toward us. Lena just muttered, "She's talking about me." Shoulders tight, jaw locked. Cynthia had filed 3 more citations that week. One for a windshield that barely made a sound, one for a planter box, and one because our leash didn't match the uniform style. I checked the bylaws. Nothing about leash color or psychological leash harmonization. But Cynthia issued the violation anyway. 3 in 5 days. One more, and we'd be up for a formal compliance hearing, the kind where they can ban you from the clubhouse, the pool, you name it. I walked over to Cynthia. "You're not a therapist. You don't have the authority to diagnose veterans," I told her. She didn't even blink. "I have a duty to report concerns shared by residents." "Then you won't mind if I report your misuse of Title 32 to the State Oversight Board." She tried to call my bluff, but what she didn't know is I'd written the intake protocol she just weaponized. She used the public version of a form I co-authored. That crossed a line from enforcement to harassment. I filed a complaint, not with the HOA, but with the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies. Then I started talking to neighbors. 5 others, 2 vets, a widow, 2 parents with kids in the military, had received similar harassment. Decorative flags, memorial wreaths, security cameras, all cited. Cynthia didn't know I was building a case. She thought the HOA was untouchable. But HOA authority isn't limitless, especially when it edges into medical, psychological, or constitutional territory. Cynthia had crossed all 3. Next HOA meeting, Cynthia called me in, flanked by the treasurer and secretary, like some kind of closed-door tribunal. I didn't bring Lena. She was home with brisket, pruning roses, calming her nerves. Inside, the air was thick with lemon cleaner. Cynthia ran through her song and dance, Lena's conduct, the dog, the bench. I slid an envelope across the table, Dora complaint tracking number. The treasurer, Evan, nearly dropped his pen. Cynthia stammered, tried to hold her ground, but Evan's body language told me everything. He was cracking. Numbers don't lie, I said, but misuse of them does. When I left, I knew Evan would come around sooner or later. 2 days later, Lena was suspended from the clubhouse and common areas. Pure fiction, she hadn't even spoken to half the neighbors they claimed she'd upset. I went straight to the city. HOA had no authority to bar anyone from municipal sidewalks. The city clerk confirmed it. Cynthia had used an outdated map to justify the suspension. I brought proof, overlays, marked boundaries, and left with a stamped receipt and a warning for city code enforcement. That night, I walked the neighborhood, looking for allies. For houses had little signs of rebellion, flags, swings, garden beds just outside the lines. Allies, not weapons. Cynthia was outside the clubhouse, clipboard in hand, pointing toward our street for some new resident. I didn't argue, just snapped a photo, logged it in my complaint. Back home, Lena was quiet, sipping coffee at sunrise, the suspension notice untouched beside her. That's how trauma works. It waits. I went to the Veterans Advocacy Legal Network and found Raina Vu, a civil attorney with a history of beating back overreaching HOAs. I gave her everything. Easement overlays, suspension orders, photos, internal messages. She caught it instantly. Cynthia was using a retired template, one struck down by a judge for targeting protected groups. Raina started prepping 2 things, a cease and desist order and a pre-suit notification. But she warned, you only get one shot to shock the board into accountability. Wait for her next misstep. Didn't take long. The next day, a new violation, this time against me, for a fence sensor installed 6 years ago, fully permitted and city registered. Cynthia was scrambling, trying to bait us into looking like the aggressors. I called in a favor from Officer Jenna Parson, community liaison for the Colorado Springs PD. We reviewed footage, no violations, just Cynthia taking photos at odd hours, using HOA language to intimidate. She's manufacturing, Jenna said. She couldn't file charges but flagged it for the conflict board. Now it was on public record. At Spring Beautification Day, I kept my distance, watching Evan. He looked beat, like someone carrying secrets too long. When I cornered him, he finally admitted, she's planning a full board review on your household. She wants me to sign off. You don't have to be the villain in her story, I said, leaving the mulch bag between us. Evan just nodded, eyes tired. Next morning, Evan texted, need to talk. We met at the city planning office. He handed me a folder, citations, server screenshots, drafts with Cynthia's handwriting, her changes, her directives. There it was, proof she was orchestrating the whole thing. I told him to recuse himself from votes, document the conflict of interest. You won't be alone, I promised. I spent 48 hours building my case. Mapped every violation in 18 months. 87% targeted military families, disabled residents, or homes with memorials. That wasn't random. I submitted everything to the Community Oversight Bureau and the insurance underwriters. Once they saw the pattern, Cynthia's liability became the HOA's nightmare. Monday, I delivered copies of the signed city boundary letters to the clubhouse, the HOA, and city liaisons. That night, Lena asked, do you want me there? It's your bench, I told her. But it's your call. She nodded. I want to look her in the eye when it falls apart. The hearing started like every bad HOA meeting, lemon disinfectant, folding chairs, microphones blinking red. Cynthia strutted in, folder bulging. She opened with accusations, threats, posturing. I waited until she finished, then stood, dropped the signed city boundary document on the table, handed out violation maps, and Evan's written statement. The room erupted, neighbors gasping, cell phones out, board members shifting in their seats. Cynthia tried to shout me down, called it an ambush, accused me of harassment, but the entire thing was being recorded for the state. Lena stood next, voice low but clear. My sister died in uniform. That bench is the only place I feel her hand on my shoulder. You called it clutter, but I've never been violated like this in my own neighborhood. The silence was thick. Cynthia tried to recover. No one listened. Board members left. The hearing dissolved on its own. Next morning, the outdoor amphitheater filled up for the open forum. Usually, no one showed up. This time, it was packed. Neighbors with citations, flags, garden gnomes, all the things Cynthia hated. You're not speaking for us anymore, someone shouted as Cynthia took the mic. Evan stepped up, voice steady. I confirmed the pattern. Residents started reading out stories, petty fines, threatened bans, forced removals. Someone unrolled a petition, motion to remove Cynthia Bellamy as HOA president. Dozens of signatures already. Cynthia went pale, couldn't answer. As if on cue, Brisket barked from the rose garden, where Lena's bench still stood, untouched. Neighbors began to clap, slow at first, then spreading, not wild but final. Cynthia turned and walked away, silent. Later, the board posted her resignation online and suspended every enforcement action she'd initiated. That night, Lena sat on the bench, petals drifting down around her. I sat beside her. No words, just restoration, neighbors passing, nodding, touching the bench, reading the plaque. I bolted a time capsule under the seat. Photo, original violation, boundary map, and a note. This bench stood its ground. So did she. Willow Ridge changed. Not perfectly, not forever. There'll always be people who chase power. But the neighborhood remembers now. And remembering is how you keep tyranny out. Lena smiles more these days, not because it doesn't hurt, but because she's not afraid to be seen. So if you're sitting on your own version of that bench, wondering if anyone will stand beside you, yeah, you're not alone. You don't need to shout. Just document everything. Be that one person willing to stand your ground, and eventually, others will join you. Tyranny doesn't fall in a thunderclap. It fractures, one crack at a time. And if you've got a story, share it below. Hit subscribe if you want to hear more about people standing up for what matters. And next time someone tells you to take a seat, make sure it's on your own bench.